quite windy here. It's tied down well, though. I think this is. I actually wasn't expecting it to be this windy. Hopefully, you can actually hear what I'm saying. Okay, great. So this is I think the most inspiring thing that I've ever seen, and I'd just like to thank the SpaceX team and the suppliers and the people of Boca Chica and Brownsville. Thank you for your support, and just like, wow, what an incredible job by such a great team to build this incredible vehicle. So it's like, first of all, I want to start with that. So I'm just so proud to work with such a great team, and it's really ripping here, by the way. If you're watching this online, it is really windy. So the point of this presentation and this event is really there are two elements to it. One is to inspire the public, get people excited about our future in space, and get people fired up about the future. There are so many things to worry about, so many things to be concerned about. There are many troubles in the world, of course, and these are important, and we need to solve them. But we also need things that make us excited to be alive, that make us glad to wake up in the morning, and be fired up about the future, and think, yeah, the future is going to be great. And this space exploration is one of those things. And becoming a spacefaring civilization, being out there among the stars, this is one of the things that I know makes me glad to be alive. I think it makes many people glad to be alive. It's one of the best things. And there's really, we're faced with a choice. Which future do you want? Do you want the future where we become a spacefaring civilization and are in many worlds and are out there among the stars, or one where we are forever confined to Earth? And I say it is the first. And I hope you agree with me. Yeah. So what the question? The critical breakthrough that's needed for us to become a spacefaring civilization is to make space travel like air travel. So with air travel, when you fly a plane, you fly that plane many times. I mean, the risk of stating the obvious, really almost any mode of transport, whether it's a plane, a car, a horse, a bicycle, is reusable. You use that mode of transport many times. And if you had to get a new plane every time you flew somewhere, and even have two planes for a return journey, very few people could afford to fly. Or if you could use a car only once, very few people could afford to drive a car. So the critical breakthrough that's necessary is a rapidly reusable orbital rocket. This is basically the holy grail of space, and the fundamental thing that's required. And it is a very hard thing to do. It's only barely possible with the physics of Earth. I mean, if Earth's gravity was a little heavier, it would be impossible. And if Earth's gravity was a little lighter, it would be quite easy. So we're really right on the cusp of what is physically possible. So in order to create a rapidly reusable rocket, and fully reusable orbital rocket, you have to have engines that have incredibly high specific impulse, that essentially are extremely efficient. You need to have a structure that is also incredibly mass efficient. And then that all needs to come back to the launch pad and be able to be refilled with propellant and flown again very quickly, just like an aircraft. So it's just because of the physics of Earth being quite a deep gravity well and having quite a thick atmosphere. This is a tough but not impossible thing. But it is the most fundamental thing. So with SpaceX, we started out 17 years ago, and the first rocket we designed was the Falcon 1, which was that guy right there.
3,
so,
2,
yeah.
1. Liftoff.
Stage separation.
Separation confirmed.
So Falcon 1, we thought, yeah, good old Falcon 1. I mean, we started off, we were very naive. In fact, the reason, I should say, the reason it's September 28th was September, this is the 11th anniversary of the first time SpaceX reached orbit. So 11 years ago today, SpaceX made orbit for the first time. And it was actually our fourth launch, and if that launch had not succeeded, SpaceX, that would have been the end of SpaceX. That was all. I'd run out of money. There were no more investors, and that would have been it. So if that fourth launch had not succeeded, that would have been curtains. But fortunately, fate smiled on us that day, and we made it to orbit. And I have great respect for anyone who makes it to orbit. That was a hard thing. And then. We were very naive, obviously very naive on many levels back then, because we did actually try to recover the first stage. So the first stage had a parachute on it, and we thought, okay, we'll just pop the parachute when it comes back into the atmosphere, and then it'll land somewhere in the ocean. We'll go fish it out of the ocean with a boat. This does not work. So, and I actually remember getting mad at the parachute supplier. I'm like, yeah, your parachute didn't work. I'm like, no, it wasn't their fault. When the rocket comes in from space, it's coming in, that first stage is coming in like, Mach 10 to 12, and it hits the atmosphere like it's a concrete wall, and boom. So, you actually have to orient the rocket carefully. You have to have aerodynamic surfaces. You have to do an entry burn to slow it down. Then you've got to guide it through the atmosphere, and then do a propulsive landing. This took us many attempts, and we actually did like a video of a blooper reel of all the times we failed, which was a lot. I think it might have taken us like 14 attempts or something before we finally successfully landed the rocket. So. So if we go on to the next slide, we can take a look at. This is Grasshopper. That's actually Falcon 9. It's hard to tell the scale, but that's a Falcon 9 size booster with one engine, and big legs with giant shock absorbers, because we didn't know what the heck we were doing. Now, amazingly, Grasshopper had zero crashes. Grasshopper is still alive. The cows are confused. Yeah. So they have Falcon 1. What you saw there was a Falcon 9 size vehicle, and then what's really kind of hard to grasp at a visceral level is that this giant ship will do the same thing that Grasshopper did. So this thing is going to take off, fly to 65,000 feet, about 20 kilometers, and come back and land in about 1 to 2 months. So that giant thing is really going to be pretty epic to see that thing take off and come back. And then hopefully, yeah. Yeah, it's wild. So now this is a quite radical. I'll talk about it later in the presentation. This is a quite a new approach to controlling a rocket, much more akin to a skydiver than a plane. But I'll talk about that later. So going from from Falcon 1 to Falcon 9 to Falcon Heavy, which we launched. Actually, the first launch of Falcon Heavy was only February of last year. So it's only been about a year and a half since the first Falcon Heavy launch, when we did 2 side-by-side booster landings. And I always like this video that was done by my friend Jonah.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mummy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools if they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is there life on Mars?
Yeah, I never thought that would happen, actually. Glad that it did. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, like some people wonder, like, why do we have the Roadster with the astronaut, Starman? And it was actually just came from a discussion of my friend Jonah's. I was at his kitchen, and I was like, normally when they do a rocket launch, they launch a rocket concrete, but that doesn't sound very inspiring. So, what do you think the most sort of fun thing is that we could launch? And he was like, well, why don't you just launch a Tesla? And that's a great idea. And And then another friend of mine, she said, why don't you put a tiny Tesla on the dashboard? So we put a tiny Tesla on the dashboard with a tiny Starman in the tiny Tesla. This is just to confuse the aliens in the future. They were like, what the heck is this? So, yeah, just want something to capture the imagination, get people excited about space. So let's see, Starship. So this is, well, you can really see it right there, obviously. There's the picture, more rendering. It's about 50 meters, so, sort of 165 feet or so. Yeah, so the ship, I think, actually, I noticed we have an error in our ship dry mass here. My apologies. I wish it was 85 tons. The ship dry mass would be approximately 120 tons. The initial Mark 1 prototype is closer to 200 tons, and in series production, I think it'll probably be about 120 tons. If we get really lucky, it might get down to 110. 99 would be super epic. But in terms of its usefulness, it'll be able to do about 150 tons with full reusability to orbit and back. So this is a very big number for full reusability. The very initial versions we're confident will do over 100 tons, but I think there's a clear path to 150 tons. And the cost of a fully reusable system is basically the cost of the propellant, which is mostly oxygen. This is 3.5 tons of oxygen for every 1 ton of fuel. So one of the advantages of this architecture over the Falcon architecture is that we actually use more oxygen per unit of fuel rather than less. So Merlin, or the Falcon architecture, is about 2.5 tons of oxygen for every 1 ton of fuel. This is 3.5 tons of oxygen for every 1 ton of fuel. So when this ascends, it's really mostly liquid oxygen. Because when you get to vacuum, there's no air, basically. So, yeah. The next slide. So, yeah. So earlier I was talking about how Starship enters and how it's controlled. It's really it's quite different from anything else. It's really falling, and so we're doing a controlled fall. So with a rocket, you're actually trying to brake, as opposed to you're trying to create drag instead of lift. It's really the opposite of an aircraft. You want the most amount of drag that you can produce. And you want some lift, especially when you're in the upper atmosphere, mostly so that you can control the maximum heating rate. You want enough lift to keep yourself high in the low density portion of the atmosphere, so you can burn off velocity, and then so you want, but then basically it goes like, if this is the Earth, it goes at about a 60 degree. My hand is the rocket. It's going at about 60 degrees. So when in orbit, you're actually going at around 25 times the speed of sound, horizontal to the ground. So this is a very important concept that is counterintuitive to our normal daily life. Being in orbit, being in 0G, is not about altitude, it's about velocity. How fast are you going horizontally? This doesn't, so when something's in orbit, it's zooming around the Earth so fast that the outward radial acceleration is equal to the inward acceleration of gravity, and then you have zero gravity. This is why you actually have zero gravity. The space station, people often think the space station is stationary, but it's actually going around the world at 25 times the speed of sound, or about 17,000 miles an hour. It always looks stationary in the pictures. And since there's no air, you don't have to have an aerodynamic structure. So you can be a totally crazy structure that doesn't look like it should be able to go 25 times the speed of sound, but it does. And you can only feel acceleration. You can't feel velocity. So people sometimes wonder, what does it feel like to go 25 times the speed of sound? Actually, it feels like nothing. Only accelerating to there feels like something. So Starship is coming in. If this platform is the Earth, it's coming in at hypersonic velocity like this, sort of at around a 60-degree angle. So it comes like this, and then starts falling, and then it just falls like a skydiver, and it's just controlling itself, and then it turns and lands like that. So that's incredibly elaborate explanation. And then you can get a sense for it. This is much better. There you go. See? Same thing. Look better with the hand? Okay. But it'll look totally nuts to see that thing land. Yeah. That'd be crazy. Wow. Cool. So let's see. Talking about the Raptor engine. So the ship will have a total of 6 engines, 3 of the sea level variety of Raptor, and those are actually on the rocket right now. So we have the 3 sea level. In fact, that's a picture of just inside that skirt. That's what it looks like. So we've got the 3 sea level Raptor engines, and they gimbal, which means that the whole engine moves. So the way a rocket steers is by moving the entire engine. So whereas an aircraft engine is static, and you move by moving like the control surfaces, like the ailerons and rudder and elevator and flaps, the rocket, when the engines are powered, you move the entire engine to steer it. But so the Starship will have 3 sea level engines that move up to about 15 degrees angle, and 3 vacuum engines that are optimized for efficiency that will be that will not move. So they will be just fixed in place. And that allows us to have the biggest bell nozzle for the vacuum Raptor engines. Aspirationally, the target is a 380-second ISP for the vacuum engine. This is a very, in sort of space geek terms, this is like really a great number. And even for the steel engines to get over a 350-second ISP is also really great. So, actually, yeah, sorry. I'm looking at the slide view and you're not. So that's what I meant by it looks like that on the inside. Sorry, go back one slide. That's the inside of the Starship right now. So that's what it looks like in the base. All right, and then heat shield. So we've gone through various iterations of heat shield. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat here. Ultimately, we decided to have heat shield hexagonal tiles, ceramic tiles that are basically like a tiny glass vermicelli at a microstructure level. So very, very light, but very crack resistant, essentially glass tiles. And they're, because Starship is a steel construction, like at first it feels like, oh, it's steel. Does that mean it's heavy? No, actually it's the lightest construction. Steel is the best thing, I think the best thing about, best design decision on this whole thing is a 301 stainless steel. Because at cryogenic temperatures, a 301 stainless actually has about the same effective strength as an advanced composite or aluminum lithium. Unlike most steels, which get brittle at low temperature, 301 stainless gets much stronger. And if it's in the extra hot condition, meaning it's cold rolled to extra hot condition, it also gets way stronger. So its strength to weight ratio at cryogenic temperatures is equivalent or even perhaps slightly better than advanced composites or aluminum lithium. So this is not well appreciated, because if you just look at the materials manual and say, like, what is the strength of stainless steel, it looks much weaker than it is. You say, what is the strength at cryogenic temperature? Oh, much stronger. Or, at very low temperature, almost twice as strong. That's when it becomes better than carbon fiber or aluminum lithium. And there's another benefit. It also has a high melting temperature. So for a reusable ship, you're coming in like a meteor. You want something that does not melt at a low temperature. You want something that melts at a high temperature. And this is where steel is extremely good as well. So it's, steel has a melting temperature around sort of 1,500 degrees centigrade, whereas aluminum, maybe 300 or 400 degrees. And same thing for carbon fiber, and that's really pushing it. This is having that much higher melting temperature means that you don't need any shielding on the leeward side of the ship when it comes in for entry. And the shielding you need on the windward side, the hot side, is massively reduced, because the thickness of the tile is actually, for a reusable system, is dependent on what back shell temperature, like how hot does the back of the tile that interfaces with the airframe get. And because the steel can take a much higher temperature, your heat shield, even on the windward side, is much lighter. The net effect is that a 301 stainless steel rocket is actually the lightest possible reusable architecture. Then it come to cost. The carbon fiber we were using was $130 a ton. The steel is $2,500 a ton. Sorry, yeah, 25. The $130,000 a ton versus $2,500 a ton. That makes much more sense. So it's $130,000 a ton for the carbon fiber, and $2,500 a ton for the steel. So the steel is about 2% of the cost of the carbon fiber. So it's a good thing we changed from carbon fiber to steel, by far. It's very easy to weld stainless steel. The evidence being that we welded it outdoors without a factory. So, yeah. Great skills by the team, but with carbon fiber, this is impossible. With aluminum lithium, also impossible. But steel is easy to weld, and it is resilient to the elements. And also, actually, as talking with Austin earlier, he was saying, like on Mars, you can like cut that up, you can weld it, you can modify it, no problem. Yeah, that's a good point. You're out there on the moon or Mars. You want something that you can modify, that you can cut up and use for other things. That's like for sure a great thing. So anyway, steel. Obviously, I'm in love with steel. It's it's time. Had to say it. So great. So let's see. Going on to the booster. So the booster is designed to take up to 37 Raptor engines. I'm not sure if we'll go that high, but you can really, have 31. I think like the minimum number you'd want is, maybe around 24. But the booster is designed to be able to take multiple engines out. So you can actually add or subtract engines as you'd like. You basically just need a lot of force pushing up. Over time, I think you probably want around a 7,500 ton force rocket, which is about twice the thrust of a Saturn V, a little more than twice the thrust, and on a roughly 5,000 ton gross liftoff mass. So for roughly 1.5 thrust to weight. For a reusable rocket, you actually want a high thrust to weight rather than with an expendable rocket where you want a low thrust to weight, because any thrust to weight below 1 is not useful. Like if you have less thrust than your weight, you don't move. So you actually want a high thrust to weight for a reusable rocket. This is a very important design optimization change. So that's why I think more engines is probably good, and getting up to around 7,500 tons over time, and a 1.5 thrust to weight ratio, or more. So, we think we're probably going to adjust the Griffin design to be kind of like more of like a diamond shape. It looks cooler, and it works better too. And then the rear fins are actually just legs, so they're not needed for stabilization or guidance. They're essentially there for legs. All right, so let's go into some of the development testing. This is a Raptor firing. All right, and then obviously we had a Raptor fire on the Starhopper. Yeah. And it's kind of hard to appreciate scale, but it's the same diameter as Starship, and obviously it's just right over there. So it's kind of hard to tell if it's the size of a trash can or how big it is. But it's about the body diameter is about 9 meters or 30 feet, not including the leg span. So this gives you a sense of size. So the little pixels there, little pixels are a human. And then there's the Hopper next to it, the Millennium Falcon for comparison. Then Starship, which is what you see before you. And then that's what it will look like with the full stack, which is almost 2.5 times as tall as this vehicle. This simulation will give you a sense of the scale of things. It slightly reminds me of the scene from Spaceballs. This is orbital refueling. Orbital refueling is extremely important for getting to Mars and getting to the moon. Or establishing a city, establish a city or on the moon or Mars. This is a vital step. To Mars. Exactly. A rapidly reusable orbital launcher or rocket is, it says a rapidly reusable rocket is required for alliteration. For getting a breakthrough in cost of access to space, that you don't throw the rockets away every flight. But another key step is refilling on orbit, so that the Starship can get to orbit with, let's say, 150 tons of payload for the moon or Mars or beyond. And then it can get tankered to fill up its propellant tanks, and so that it can depart from low Earth orbit with 1,200 tons of propellant. This is a very big thing, so that your delta velocity is enough to transport literally 150 tons to the surface of the moon or Mars. With full reusability and orbital refilling, which is essentially, the orbital refilling is actually a simplified version of what SpaceX does in docking with the space station. So it's actually harder to dock with the space station than it is to do orbital refilling. But in practicing in docking with the space station, SpaceX has also learned how to rendezvous and dock in orbit in a complex environment. So this is one of the other critical pieces of the puzzle needed to establish a base on the moon and Mars, a city ultimately. And yeah, so those are the critical ingredients. So we think it would be very exciting to have a base on the moon, even if it's just a science base. That we have, for example, we have a base at Antarctica. Many countries have bases in Antarctica for science research, and this would be an incredible area of research. So whether or not people want to live on the moon, there's definitely a lot of science to be done. I think it's close as well. So that would be quite exciting to do. And then, of course, we can go to other places in the solar system, like Saturn. But the critical thing that we need to focus on, I think, is the fastest path to a self-sustaining city on Mars. This is the fundamental thing. As far as we know, we're the only consciousness or the only life that's out there. There might be other life, but we've seen no signs of it. People often ask me, what do you know about the aliens and that? I'm like, man, I tell you, I'm pretty sure I'd know. If there were aliens. I have not seen any sign of aliens. So they're like, well, is the military hiding aliens in Area 51 or something? That's a popular meme. Well, let me tell you, the fastest way to increase defense funding would be to bring out, like, hey, we found an alien. People are like, more money for defense, definitely. This is guaranteed. That would be like on display in 2 seconds. So, the reality is, as far as we know, this is the only place, at least in this part of the galaxy or in the Milky Way, where there is consciousness. And it's taken a long time for us to get to this point. According to the geological records, Earth's been around for about 4.5 billion years, although it was mostly molten magma for about 500 million years. But still, several billion years with at least bacterial life and multicellular life for several hundred million years. But here's the interesting part, the sun is gradually getting hotter and bigger. And over time, even in the absence of global warming, man-made stuff, the sun will expand and it will overheat the Earth. My guess is probably, this is on human timescales, this is a long time, but there's only several hundred million years left. That's all we got. Okay, several hundred million years. But thought of from an evolutionary standpoint, basically, if it took an extra 10% longer for conscious life to evolve on Earth, it wouldn't evolve at all, because it would have been incinerated by the sun. So what I'm saying is that it appears that consciousness is a very rare and precious thing, and we should take whatever steps we can to preserve the light of consciousness. And the window has been open. Only now, after 4.5 billion years, is that window open. That's a long time to wait, and it might not stay open for long. I'm pretty optimistic by nature, but there's some chance that window will not be open for long. And I think we should become a multi-planet civilization while that window is open. And if we do, I think the probable outcome for Earth is even better, because then Mars could help Earth one day. And so I think we should really do our very best to become a multi-planet species and to extend consciousness beyond Earth, and we should do it now. Thank you. Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, we'll be commencing a Q&A session in just 5 minutes, so please hang out and hang tight. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please sit tight. We're going to be doing a Q&A session with Elon in just 5 minutes. Please stick around.
Oh yeah. Any questions? So, yeah.
Hi, Elon. Irene Klotz with Aviation Week. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you for the overview. Can you tell us a little bit more details about the flight test program for this and the Mark II?
Actually, can we just turn the music off? I can't quite hear because there's music playing. Oh, excellent. No, I'm sorry. Could you probably just say that again?
Yes, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more details about the flight test program for both this Mark I and the Mark II vehicle in Florida, and what the progression is to get to orbital flight and then a test flight or a commercial mission with the full vehicle?
Sure.
Thanks.
So, yep, with any development into uncharted territory, it is difficult to predict these things with precision. But I do think things are going to move very fast. So our plan is in basically 1 to 2 months to do the 20-kilometer or 65-foot flight with Starship Mark I. Our next flight after that might actually just be all the way to orbit with a booster and the ship. I'm giving you just literally stream of consciousness here. Most likely we would not fly to orbit with Mark I, but we would fly to orbit with Mark III, which will be built after Mark I right here. In fact, we'll start building it in about a month. So, yeah. And actually, so sorry to say this mid-question, but I did want to make sure to thank Yusaku Miyazawa for his great support. Yeah, he's awesome. Yusak 2020, that's his handle. That's a great handle. Anyway, he's a super cool dude, and he's like, putting a lot of serious resources to helping out Starship. So I want to thank him very much for that. Anyway, so yeah, just to frame things, we are going to be building ships and boosters at both Boca and the Cape as fast as we can. And each successive, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be really nutty to see a bunch of these things. I mean, not just one, but a whole stack of them. And we're improving both the design and the manufacturing method exponentially. So, for example, with the current way that we build the way that Mark I and Mark II cylindrical sections were built was in with basically plates. So a series of plates to create each cylinder section. With Mark III and beyond, we will literally take the coil of steel from the mill, unspool it, change the curvature to a 9-meter diameter, and do a single seam weld. And it would also be thinner, which makes it lighter and cheaper. So the rate at which we will be building ships is going to be quite crazy by space standards. I think we'll probably have Mark II built within a couple of months or less, and Mark III maybe 3 months, that type of thing. Mark IV, 4 months, maybe 5 months. And we would seek to go to orbit with probably Mark IV or Mark V. So we would, I mean, this is going to sound totally nuts, but I think we want to try to reach orbit in less than 6 months. Yeah. I mean, provided the rate of design improvement and manufacturing improvement continues to be exponential, I think that is, accurate to within a few months. Yeah.
Hi, Elon. My name is Steve Clark. I'm with the Brownsville Herald. Okay. Back in September 2014 at the groundbreaking, you said that the first crewed interplanetary mission could possibly leave
Yes.
Can you hear me? Could possibly leave from Boca Chica. Do you think that's still the case?
Yes, that is, I think, definitely possible that the first crewed mission on Starship could leave from Boca. We actually are internally competing the Cape and Boca. So I think both places will, to the best of my knowledge, both places will launch crewed missions. So I think it is extremely likely that we will launch crewed missions from Boca, and there is at least a 50% chance that it is the first mission. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hey Elon, Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut.
Hey,
How are you?
how's it going? Good. Yeah,
Good.
You have great questions online.
Thanks, you have
Yeah.
great answers.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So that belly flop to tail down maneuver, I
Yeah.
mean, that's something to see. Is that first one, this one right here, 20 kilometers, is it gonna come in that hot and do that flip that fast
Yeah.
right here, or is it gonna be out on the drone ship? Like, that's
No,
crazy.
it's basically right where Hopper took off.
Yeah.
That's basically where it's going to take off. Within, very close to where it's just right over there. So yeah, that maneuver that you saw, it will execute now. When we get to, I think maybe Mark 3, certainly Mark 4, I think probably that will be a good time to transition to hot gas thrusters from cold gas thrusters. So using essentially compressed nitrogen gas as the cold gas thruster is a pretty low ISP, sort of 60, 70 if you're very lucky, but closer to 60. With methox thruster, you can get, without really even trying hard, 300 ISP. Even if you just foam cool the walls without even regen cooling. If you regen cool it, 350, no problem, 360 even. So you're talking about something that's then 5 or 6 times the mass efficiency of the nitrogen thrusters that are on Mach 1. And if you have thrusters of that efficiency, then we don't need to use the Raptors to correct the horizontal velocity. Because right now it's actually, when the Raptors fire, the Raptors kick it over, but they actually accelerate the vehicle in the wrong direction. Then they have to overcorrect and then come back. Whereas if you have strong enough thrusters, you can just, using the onboard maneuvering thrusters without lighting the main engines, you can just go kick it hard, light the engine, land. That'd be, that's better. Yeah.
And then are those pressure fed then, those
Yeah,
Metalox?
yeah. Those would be just pressure fed, high pressure gas methox, and so you'd have a high pressure, CH4 bottle, high pressure O2 bottle, and then the great thing is like those they don't care what attitude you're at. You can be at any attitude, any G's, any attitude, it'll still fire. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Elon. I'm Tim Fernholz from Quartz. Thanks so much for taking the time.
You're welcome.
2 questions, if I may. One, just technical, following up on the presentation. To do useful stuff in orbit, you're going to need the booster as well as the Starship, right?
Yes. Starship cannot get to Earth orbit without the booster. But anywhere except Earth, pretty much. Well, not counting Venus. But like the Mars or the Moon, the ship, provided you have a propellant plant on Mars or Moon, the ship can easily get a single stage from the surface of the Moon all the way to the surface of Earth without a booster. So that shows you how deep, like Earth has a deep gravity well and a thick atmosphere. But definitely cannot, if we really went crazy light, you could probably do single stage to orbit non-reusable with the ship. But that would be pointless.
Elon, I just wanted to ask, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine had a tweet last night about this presentation. He's concerned, I guess, about enthusiasm for SpaceX's various programs. I'm just curious if you have any comment or response to that.
Yeah, for sure, from a SpaceX resource standpoint, our resources are overwhelmingly on Falcon and Dragon. Let's be clear, it was really quite a small percentage of SpaceX that did Starship, less than 5% of the company, basically. The really hard part that requires a lot of resources is optimizing something past the initial prototype phase and bringing it into volume production. So to be clear, the vast majority of our resources are on Dragon and Falcon, especially Crew Dragon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Elon. Chris Gebhardt with NASA Spaceflight. How do you guys envision keeping the methane and oxygen inside the tanks from boiling off in any significant quantity during a multi-month interplanetary trip to Mars? And on a more Earth-grounded question, what's your contamination mitigation strategy since these things are being built outside in the elements and not in a factory?
Well, these are pretty far in the distance questions. These questions are relevant, but in the future years. Keeping the landing propellant cold on the way to Mars is a lot easier than it may seem, because you can essentially vacuum, just like you'd keep cryogenic propellant stored on Earth for long periods of time. You vacuum jacket it. We would essentially have header tanks that are bigger than these header tanks and vent them to vacuum. So you would just basically have a tank inside a tank with multi-layer insulation, and this way you can keep things cryogenic for months, no problem. It requires very little energy you don't even really need to worry about boil-off. You could apply some energy to cryo-cool it, but you don't really need to, you'd have a tiny amount of boil-off. In vacuum, things are kind of weird. They're not like on Earth because you have no convective cooling, really, in zero-G. So you actually have, the sun side of your rocket is very hot, and the not sun side of your rocket is at 3 degrees Kelvin. So it's super cold. So you just keep your cold stuff on the cold side and the hot stuff on the hot side, and this is not a problem to manage. For the long-term stuff, for sort of what's called contamination of Mars, I think this concern, first of all, we'll do everything we can to mitigate it, obviously. But at the end of the day, if you're going to send people to Mars, that's a pretty big contaminant, But I really don't think that some Earth-based bacterium is going to be able to migrate much through Mars. The thing that makes Mars very difficult is that it is both cold and has high ultraviolet. So if it was either cold or ultraviolet, you could evolve to deal with it. But the cold slows down metabolic processes, and then the ultraviolet shreds the DNA. So you're cold and shredded. This is very difficult for things to exist on the surface of Mars, and that's why we have not found any traces of life on the surface of Mars to date. If there is any life, it'll be very deep underground, and I think very resilient. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. It's also worth noting that over time, there have been meteors, there have been chunks of Earth that have been chipped off by meteors, and chunks of Mars that have been chipped off from Mars. And Earth and Mars have actually exchanged material many times over the last several hundred million years.
Hey, Elon, it's Chris Davenport from the Washington Post.
Hey.
Curious about your vision for this area. I mean, when you drive by and you see this, it's surreal.
This is surreal.
Yeah, but I know your vision isn't maybe like a government launch site, like a Cape Canaveral. But what does this look like a private, operational, commercial spaceport?
Yeah, I mean, it will definitely get fancier than it currently is, because the reason it's not fancier is just because it would have taken too long to build the buildings. So since it was going to take so long to build the buildings, we just built it outside. Yeah, this is like my new thing is management by rhyming. If the schedule's long, it's wrong, and if it's tight, it's right. Yeah. It works. SR-71, fastest plane in history ever. It's also the coolest plane ever. It had no anti-missile defenses except one: accelerate. Yeah. And zero. They tried to shoot it down many times. 0 successes.
Could you just give give us a quick sense of what you think this area will look like in, say, 10 years when you are flying crews?
Oh, I think it'll be like a lot more buildings and a lot more stuff. Like way more stuff than is currently here. As you can tell, the wind is really quite vigorous. Like one of the things that I think will be quite important to have locally is propellant production. So trucking massive, thousands of tons of liquid oxygen to the site doesn't make a ton of sense. We should really produce the liquid oxygen here. And by the way, we have gaseous oxygen in the atmosphere, so we basically just need electricity. I forgot to mention, one of the things over time is, like for the propellant production on Mars, will be completely renewable because we will use solar panels, pull the CO2 out of the atmosphere. Mars is a primarily CO2 atmosphere. Get the H2O, the water, from the ice. Mars has a massive amount of ice. You combine H2O and CO2 and you get CH4 and O2. There's a very long understood process of run it over ruthenium catalyst. This is a Sabatier process to create CH4 and O2 out of CO2 and H2O. And that same system that we developed for Mars will long-term be used on Earth. So long-term, this is like, long-term we will produce the propellant for the rockets using solar power. And pull the CO2 from Earth's atmosphere, use water, combine that to create CH4 and O2 on Earth. And so the long-term outcome will be quite sustainable and renewable for Earth and Mars.
Jeff Faust of Space News. You spent a lot of time this summer working with the FAA getting approval to do a single Starhopper flight to 150 meters. Now you're talking about flying a much bigger vehicle to much higher altitudes and ultimately flying to orbit. Where are you in the FAA in terms of getting approval for that? And will those flight opportunities be able to coexist with, say, the local residents around here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the FAA administrator for space has been excellent to work with. Very forward-leaning. Really, I would just like to say thanks to the FAA for their support, actually. I mean, really, there's, minimal delays related to regulatory activity, and they've been really very reasonable, and so, the support's very much appreciated. So, I think the FAA asks, good questions and wants to make sure things are safe, as do we. And so we're going to make sure that the risk to the public is extremely, vanishingly small, almost nothing, basically. So, it's the same sort of thing that we've had we deal with on Falcon 9 and Dragon, and has gone very well, for the 17 years that SpaceX has been around. So I feel pretty optimistic about things. I don't see any fundamental obstacles. We are working with the residents of Boca Chica Village because we think over time it's going to be quite disruptive to living in Boca Chica Village because it'll end up needing to get cleared for safety a lot of times. So I'd say probably not very. It would be just not very comforting to the Boca Chica Village. I think the actual danger to Boca Chica Village is low, but it's not tiny. So therefore, we want super tiny risk. So, probably over time, better to buy out the villages, and we've made an offer to that effect. Yeah.
Thank you, Elon. It's Tarek Malik from Space.com, and I was curious, with the design update here, if 100-person crew size for base flights is still kind of the target now, and how the life support...
Sorry, could you talk about louder? The wind is like howling in my ear, unfortunately.
Sure. Yes, with the design update here, I'm curious if the 100-person crew size target is still the main target for base crew flights, and how the life support system for that is being developed for both the initial test flights and then maybe for Mr. Miyazawa's flight too in upcoming years. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think you could still do 100 people. Like the pressurized volume on Starship is around 1,000 cubic meters. So if you had 100 people, you'd have 10 cubic meters per person, which is, you know, especially in like a 0G situation, that's actually quite a lot of room. Unlike a 1G situation, you only get to use one surface, really, live on one surface in a 1G situation, but in a 0G situation, you can live on 6 surfaces. You know, you can like all 6 sides of a cube. So things are way roomier than they may seem. And by the way, 1,000 cubic meters, I think, is close to what the space station pressurized volume is. So you know, Starship is like basically like launching space station pressurized volume on every flight. This is quite a lot. We can make it bigger if as needed, you know. Yeah.
Hi, Elon. Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now. Thanks for taking our questions. We see the Starship prototype here, Mark 1. You talked a little bit about how you're going to build the super heavy vehicle. Can you update us a little bit more detail about how that development is going, where exactly it'll be built, and when we might see it on a test stand or on a pad?
Sure, yeah, good question. So the priority is to build at least 2 Starships at each site, at Boca and the Cape, and then start building the booster. So we'll complete you know, Mach 1 through 4 before doing Mach 1 of the booster, and then we'll do you know, Mach 1 and Mach 2 of the boosters at the Cape and Boca. The main constraint on launching the booster is engines, because obviously the booster has a lot of engines. So spooling up the Raptor production rate is extremely important to, vital, obviously, essential to completing the booster. Doing the tanks and the legs and, say, the grid fins, that is not a constraint. Like that we can get done fast. But we need, I think we'd want to have at least probably 24 engines, but I think really at least 31 engines to launch. So you add that up, you've got a lot of engines there. You know, we need for 4 Starships. We need well, these just have 3. Mach 1 and 2 just have three Raptor engines. Mach 3 and 4 will have 6. So you add them. This looks like a lot of engines, basically, including development engines. From now through orbit, we probably need 100 Raptor engines. And our production rates right now is maybe one every sort of 8 to 10 days. But it should be one every couple of days in a few months. And then our target is to get to a Raptor engine every day by Q1 next year, or sooner.
And if I may, when will we see people flying on this vehicle into space?
Well, I think we could potentially see people fly next year. You know, if we get to orbit in about 6 months, then and we have remember it's designed to be a reusable rocket, so a reusable booster, reusable ship, so we can do many flights to prove out the reliability very quickly. So whereas with an expendable vehicle, you have to build, if you want to do 10 flights, let's say, to prove out the viability of an expendable vehicle, you need to build and destroy 10 vehicles. Whereas we can do 10 flights, you know, within basically 10 days. So when I say rapid reusability, I mean, you know, you could fly it, you could fly the booster 20 times a day. You fly the ship 3 or 4 times a day. That's what I mean by reusability. And the only reason the ship it takes more time than that, more time than the booster, is that you need a couple of you need 3 or 4 orbits to synchronize for the ship so that it is over, I don't want to get into those complicated thing of orbital dynamics and the rotation of the Earth relative to satellite. But as anyone who's like knows space, you know, the track of a satellite, unless it's an equatorial satellite, is a sinusoidal track on the Earth. Unless it's equatorial or sun synchronous. So. You know, launching sort of due east, you have to kind of wait for the orbits to the ground path to sync up with the launch site, and that's the only reason it really takes like, you know, maybe 6 hours or something like that to sync up and land back at Boca or the Cape. You know, one of the really interesting things to contemplate is the total mass to orbit capability of a large reusable system where you have a significant fleet in operation. You know, if you've got something like Starship where you've got, you know, maybe 150 tons capable to orbit, and the ship can fly, is capable of, say, theoretically flying 4 times a day, but you know, they call it like 75% uptime, so theoretical 3 times a day, 365 days a year. So that's like about 1,000 flights a year for the ship. The booster can do a lot more than that. This is obviously max theoretical. And you've got, you know, 150 tons. That's 150,000 tons to orbit per year per ship. And if you've got, say, 10 ships, you would have 1.5 million tons to orbit per year. 20 ships, you've got 3 million tons orbit a year. I think the total rest of world capacity, if you take all rockets on Earth, including Falcon, the total capacity to orbit, I think, is around 200 to 300 tons currently. Total Earth capacity to orbit is about 200 to 300 tons if all rockets launched at max rate. So we're talking about something that is, with a fleet of Starships, 1,000 times more than all Earth capacity combined. All other rockets combined would be 0.1%, including ours. But you kind of need that if you're going to build a city on Mars. So it's got to be done. It's got to be done.
Elon, hi, it's Bill Harwood with CBS News. I just wanted to follow up on an earlier question about life support systems, because that's not trivial, and obviously you're building a very sophisticated piece of hardware. Are you thinking about closed loop regenerative systems? Are you thinking about developing these in-house, or are you looking at designs that already exist on space station, for example? And what are you shooting for initially? I know you're not going to be launching 100 people on your first flight, but what sort of a crew complement can we expect on those initial test flights, and how sophisticated does that life support system need to be? Thanks.
Yeah, I think for sure you'd want to have a regenerative life support system. So that just means you're recycling everything. You know, that's for sure important if you're on a several months journey to Mars and then you know, on the surface for 18 months. Regenerative is a kind of a necessity. So I don't think it's actually super hard to do that. Relative to the spacecraft itself, the life support system is pretty straightforward. Yeah, you just got to yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You got to take out the water vapor and the CO2, convert that back to O2. It's not super hard. The early flights of Starship would not have any people on board. It would just be in automatic mode. It would only be later flights that would have people on board. So I think like even the first flights to Mars, we would send at least a couple of ships, have them just land automatically before sending people. Yeah.
Take about 2 more questions.
Hi, Elon. Eric Berger with Ars Technica. I would just argue the X-15 was the coolest plane of all time. And my question, I guess, is, you know, we're not really used to seeing hardware built in less than a year. Can you talk about the timeline for this vehicle? Like, when you started fabricating it and how you went so quickly on it. Thank you.
Actually, I'm not sure. I think like up until October last year, we were pursuing a completely different design. So it was really, I switched the design to steel, I think, approximately maybe October last year. And then it's like, okay, so what's the fastest we can build a steel, ship in Texas? And then I think we built it in about 4 months or something, maybe 5 months. And then the ship, I think I'm not sure exactly when we started building it, but yeah, maybe about 4 months ago that we started building the ship, maybe 5. So it's been 4 or 5 months since we started building the ship from nothing, I think. Yeah, something like that.
And how did you go so fast?
Well, I have this mantra called, if the schedule's long, it's wrong. If it's tight, it's right. Yeah. And I just basically just go recursive improvement on schedule. And say with feedback loop, did this make it go faster? Okay, if it didn't, we're going to need to fix it. If the design takes a long time to build, it's the wrong design. This is the fundamental thing. Over and over, it's like the tendency is to complicate things. And I have another thing, which is like the best part is no part. The best process is no process. It weighs nothing, costs nothing, can't go wrong. So as obvious as that sounds,